All right. So today in class, these are some of the slides that we went over. Gonna record them and put them online for you. So we basically just looked at the informal roles of the president. And a lot of time these get argued as being the more important roles than the enumerated powers granted by the Constitution, because these give the president a lot of his leverage or their leverage over Congress. So I'm going to talk about these in a bit more detail in the coming slides. First off, the president is the morale builder, essentially charged with keeping the spirits of the people high. Some examples would be, things like after September 11th, George W. Bush was responsible for helping to build the morale of the American people. Again in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina, or in 2008, 2009, when the housing market crashed, President Obama was asked to help boost and keep the morale of the people high. Next we get the chief legislator. President's responsible with setting the legislative agenda. One thing you need to know or need to remember is that the president can't propose laws to Congress. So he can talk to congressmen and have them propose the laws. He can draft the bill, but he is not allowed to take the bill and put it in front of Congress. So if you're in the House, you either need a member of the House or the Senate to do that. And so that is an important thing to note. He cannot propose laws to Congress. He can draft them and give them to somebody, and they can propose them, but the person proposing the bill must be in Congress. But setting the legislative agenda is big. Typically, presidents kind of have what's called the first 100 days. They need to move quickly in their first term because it's common to lose ground in the House and the Senate by the midterm elections of your first presidency. And so like we saw in 2008, Barack Obama kind of had an electoral mandate. He had control of both the House and the Senate, and that's why he chose to push the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, when he did. So for Trump, it'll be very important for him to push his agenda quickly because his houses are likely to change. And coalition builder kind of fits in with the chief legislator part. He needs to gather votes in Congress to move his agenda forward. So like Obama was able to put together a coalition with the Affordable Care Act, Trump will need to be able to put together coalitions to move forward with things that he has proposed. And so kind of setting your legislative priorities and then moving forward from there. Oftentimes that means compromising with the other side, so in order to gain a few votes that you need in order to get your legislation passed. President is also the party leader. It's easier to have a figurehead that's in charge than it is to have a collective body in charge. And so the president serves as the party leader, moving the legislative agenda. Health insurance wasn't just something Obama wanted. It was common among Democrats, and so he helped to move their agenda forward. De-alignment and decentralization have led to kind of a decrease in that power. Remember, the decentralized nature of American government makes it so that representatives can act on their own. So representatives from Colorado can act in the best interest of Coloradans and not have to worry as much about going against their party. Then we have chief diplomat. It's easier to have one person be the face of the nation. It wouldn't make sense to have a whole giant group of people that you send to other countries trying to negotiate trade deals and agreements. And so having one figurehead that does that and is able to do that well is extremely important. And then crisis manager, which sort of fits in with morale builder, kind of helping deal with these sudden and dangerous events, like we talked about with Katrina or 9/11 or even the housing crash would all be examples. One of the things that can be kind of interesting with regards to the crisis manager is you almost wonder if we create more issues for ourselves by having such access to information. It used to be that by the time the president had learned something was wrong, it had fixed itself. because information traveled so slowly, and so they played a much smaller role. And sometimes I wonder if that centralization of power is a bad thing. If we have a problem in Colorado and we deal with it ourselves, we're probably going to deal with it in the way that makes the most sense to us, because that's our problem. Where when the national government starts getting involved, that sure that they like to think they know everything, but at the end of the day, they don't necessarily know what's best for Colorado. And so I do wonder if the speed of information has made it so that the president is micromanaging, or the federal government is micromanaging too much. And then the last thing is the recruiter, and this kind of goes back to that idea of the electoral mandate. So kind of when the people speak, Congress listens. Reagan was a great example of somebody who was able to mobilize the people. He would go on TV and he would tell the people what he wanted. And this was a time when cable news wasn't as common and people had fewer channels, and so if the president was on TV, a lot more people were going to see him. But still, Reagan was able to mobilize the people, which then forced Congress to act on the things that he saw as important. The other side to that can be if the president tries to do that and the people don't respond, that kind of tells Congress they don't really need to listen to the president, because remember, their concern is votes. And so if they are getting votes, that's what matters to them. It doesn't matter as much what the president wants. Now, if aligning with the president will help them get votes, then they'll be more inclined to do that. So if you're going to be the recruiter, you need to be effective at it. Next, we get into the executive office of the president. And this is kind of a hard thing to lecture on. It's most important to note that the president basically sets it up how they want. Your textbook kind of compares Nixon to Clinton and Obama, and I believe it talks about Bush a bit as well. And so different leaders, different presidents set up their executive office differently. It's up to them. The chief of staff is kind of the top dog, the top aide to the president. And they have a lot of control over who can access the presidency. The president's going to tell them what they want and choose somebody that will implement that. Like it talks about with Nixon. Nixon didn't want to talk to many people. He wanted everybody would go to the chief of staff, and then the chief of staff would report to Nixon. Where it talks about other presidents like Clinton having a much more open door policy and wanting to be much more involved in the different issues. These councils below are good to know. They're mandated from Congress. I'm not going to talk about them a ton right now because all we're looking at is sort of what they deal with. They're also in your textbook. Trade representative, that'll be a big one, especially with Trump and the way he's talked about negotiating trade deals. It'll be interesting to see who gets chosen and how well they do with that. And so the main thing to note is that presidents choose. A lot of offices are kind of loosely grouped into the executive office. It's kind of broad and vague. One of the questions the other day was talking about department. If certain departments are superior to others, Department of Interior and as opposed to Department of Defense and whatnot. And a good way to think about that is they tend to be relatively equal, but if you're going, equal isn't even necessarily the best word as much as independent. But if you're going to sort of specify, look at the 25th Amendment, and that outlines the order of who succeeds the president if the president dies. That's sort of a way to look at the order of importance. Lastly, we have the cabinet. The difference between the White House, or the White House's office and the cabinet. Our cabinets tend to be, the cabinets are confirmed positions. So you have the White House staff and you have the cabinet. Cabinet members need to be confirmed by the Senate. Again, it's vaguely mentioned in the Constitution. I shouldn't say that it's not mentioned because it does talk about appointing members to his cabinet to help him. And so it is a constitutional allowance. It's just not a ton of detail in there. And these are enacted by Congress to help the president administrate their executive responsibilities. And so each department had kind of rules in favor of their bureaucracy. And so they're fighting for funds and fighting for the people that kind of work in their department. And again, the way to distinguish is these are the people that have secretary as their title. So if you see secretary, that lets you know they're a cabinet position instead of just somebody that's in the White House staff. So that is what we looked at today. This was our political cartoon. I got a kick out of it. A lot of people concerned with Russia recently, and so it's taking a knock at the White House and the Kremlin sort of being the same. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy and have a wonderful evening.